But I see my man is in the background. The one, the only, Mark Sleboda. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay today?
Tomorrow, I'm alive. How the hell are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to
I
be on
am
the show.
okay. I am okay. I'm ready for the holidays. It's always an honor and a pleasure to have you, man. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the holidays. I'm going to take next week or this rest of this week off after Wednesday, so I'm looking forward to it. Um, Mark Sleboda, by the way, international relations security analyst. You can follow all of Mark's work on Boosty. If you put in his name, Mark Sleboda, or Real Politic with Mark Sleboda, his work will appear. Again, Mark has fantastic interviews. So definitely check him out. He's damn good at what he does. Mark, I guess we have to start with. I'm not even going to start with negotiations. I'll leave that for the last 5 minutes because that, to me, is the thing that matters less right now because I'm very skeptical of those negotiations. I will start with Putin's Q&A, end of the year question and answer, because he was very strong in many of his answers in that Q&A, especially around things like Kaliningrad, um, the money that they're attempting to steal that they failed miserably at stealing. There's that. The Kaliningrad thing caught my interest though, because he made it very clear, like this effectively would be war. If anything gets in the way of us in Kaliningrad, we will destroy that thing. Right here. In fact, right here. Let me see if this is in English. Okay, this is not in English, so there's no point in me playing that. But why did this question come about? Like, what is the significance of this particular question? Because obviously he's laying down a red line on this.
Okay, I think the question came about. There has been an increased tension in the Baltic to begin with for some time, right? We saw at least one attempt by the Europeans, by the European NATO, by Estonia, backed up then in the air by jets from several NATO countries. There was an attempt to seize control of a Russian oil tanker moving through the very narrow span of international waters, right, through the center of the Baltic. They attempted to command a Russian tanker. This was already a couple of months ago to
Yes.
leave international waters to accept being boarding, and they refused. And the entire Estonian Navy, like all three dinghies and a patrol boat, attempted to start to approach this, and then Russia jetted out some MiGs and I believe some Sus, and they very quickly retreated from that possibility. But there is increasing rhetoric within the European countries of NATO about the Baltic, about kind of the idea of intercepting Russian shipping in the Baltic. And part of that is because there is a hysteria in Europe right now. And that is that Russia is conducting hybrid warfare against them. And to an extent, Russia is conducting hybrid warfare against them. And certainly the West is conducting hybrid warfare against Russia. I believe there is a degree of sabotage of European and American military industrial complex going on. There have been a number of incidences, and the same thing is true on the other side. That has also been experienced in Russia. But in particular, part of the claims of hybrid warfare is that Russia is somehow flying drones over European capitals. And they've never done anything, supposedly. And here's the problem, is that this has actually been looked into by European journalists and think tanks, and they can't actually find any evidence that Russia has been involved in any of this. And I very much doubt that they have been, right? There have been incidences of, hobbyists flying drones, of small airplanes mistaked for drones, of basically the I guess the new modern equivalent of UFO sightings was the way the report cited it. But they have, and this was compounded. All this hysteria was compounded by statements from the Kiev regime, who is of course playing devil's advocate here and increasing the hysteria that Russia is flying drones off of its oil tankers, right? That oil tankers flagged by Russia, or even not flagged by Russia, right? Just part of the maritime shipping industry, are flying drones, and they're approaching European capitals and flying around. I mean, that was the extent of it. I don't believe any of it is true. It's almost certainly absurd hysteria. Russia has better things to do with their drones than that. It is a needless provocation, and such as it is actually happening. And I don't believe there's actually much even happening at all. But I'm sure that the Kiev regime is behind whatever it is. And the goal, of course, is to increase the level of tension and direct conflict between NATO and Russia, and hopefully to interfere with Russia's oil industry, right? It's oil shipping. So that is all this tensions going on in the Black Sea. On top of that, and related to it, we've had statements from NATO generals that if a conflict between Russia and NATO starts, well, then they'll take Kaliningrad right off the board, right off the very beginning. They will attack it, and they will they can take it over or destroy it very quickly. That was the summation of their statements. And obviously the Russians took some umbrage at this. And I mean, the level of rhetoric is reaching incredible provocation level status. Because imagine if Russia was talking about destroying a European city or taking over a European city. The front page of every Western newspaper and magazine and TV show would be filled with it. And the Russians were incensed, but to a degree, the Russian government also played this down as, well, really absurd bluster from children. I mean, but Putin has obviously felt the need to respond to it, that if Kaliningrad is a Russian city, and the Europeans may not like that, but that was part of the result of World War II, and they're not going to get it back. And it is completely populated by Russians. And if there is perceived to be a military threat to it, well, that would be a war, and Russia would respond accordingly. Kaliningrad is very inconvenient because it is an exclave, right? It is separated from mainland Russia, right? Tucked in the corner between Lithuania and Poland. And it's actually, of course, inconvenient for Russia because they have to get supplies there by train that has to cross through enemy territory, or by ship, or by air. And that right now is all compounded in difficulty by all the tensions. That said, it is there. It's still a thriving, city. And because Russia has missile systems there, ballistic missile systems, Iskanders, as well as some of their best air defense, S-400s, possibly S-500s there. It complicates all of NATO's defense strategies because this is essentially a redoubt of air defense very powerful, very long-range air defense, and offensive missile systems behind their lines, right, in Northern Europe there. It complicates their ability to wage a war against Russia in the area.
Yeah.
So if there was a conflict, yes, that would be one of the early targets to break out. And Putin, because of all of this, and because of, I think ultimately primarily because of this NATO general opening his mouth and bragging about things that I don't believe that NATO has any actual capability to do. They could nuke Kaliningrad, sure. Eventually they'd get one through, but then it would be a nuclear war and they'd be completely wiped out. So I don't really understand. If they think they have some conventional way to seize control of Kaliningrad, I very much doubt that. I very much doubt that.
I'm curious.
So that's
what
why
do you think?
Putin felt the need
to
respond.
Please finish. I'm sorry. Please finish.
Yeah, that's why Putin felt the need to respond to it, to reassure the Russian public that, if there was an actual military threat, Russia would respond to it and it would be a war.
Do you think that's where Russia's mind is currently? I mean, obviously, Ukraine, despite being a proxy, Donald Trump apparently can't get it to accept even a dead deal or a deal that would be dead. Can't push him to do it. The Europeans obviously is not for it. I don't even know if they have a real seat at the table or if they're just being placated. But this seems to be careening onward to something. And whether the Russians take all of Ukraine, whether they take a particular portion of Ukraine and say we're done, whatever that looks like, do you see the Europeans acknowledging at some point, all right, this is enough, this is just bluster? Or do you think when they're talking about 2030 that they are seriously talking about confronting Russia in like 5 years with this idea of propping up Ukraine for as long as it takes?
Okay, so first of all, I mean, as far as the idea that the Europeans do they not have a say at the negotiation table? There is no negotiation table. Negotiations have not even begun, at least as far as Russia is concerned. All that's happened is there is another negotiation table between the Trump administration, the rest of the U.S. government, the Europeans, and the Kiev regime. And they've just been arguing amongst themselves. And Russia's somewhere off to the side, like, you guys got your ducks in a row yet? Have you got your shit together? And that's what's going on. I mean, meanwhile, this circle jerk continues. There is no peace process. There is no negotiations. It's a bunch of the West arguing amongst themselves. And it's completely, pointless because the Europeans and the Kiev regime aren't going to agree to anything. And even what the U.S. is proposing that the Kiev regime and the Europeans don't agree with, that's also not acceptable to Russia, right? They just said, yeah, okay, we can start talking with that. I mean, that's a foundation, but we don't actually agree to any of it. I mean, that is so. And that was just talking points. I mean, as far as the Russians are concerned, the 28-point peace plan that I don't know that Witkoff and Kushner, two amateurs, really? Not real diplomats, apparently, I don't know, scribbled together on a napkin and in an IHOP somewhere or something. I don't know. I mean, that's the level that it. I mean, it's not a peace plan, right? It's some ideas jotted down on paper, and that's the way the Russians regard it. Right. Yeah, sure. We can use that as the basis of beginning actual negotiations. And they said, of course, we will have to examine every single word by word, blah, blah, blah. Right. Part of the problem is the Russians expect a real negotiation process, right? Hearkening back to the Cold War, where teams of professional people on both sides sit down and create something resembling, as much as there is a legal document in international relations, a treaty that is argued and gone over by teams of professionals on both sides. The problem is the U.S. is just completely incapable of that anymore, right?
Yeah.
They've the decades of the unipolar moment, they're not trained up for it. They don't have those abilities. They're not even used to negotiating or doing diplomacy anymore. They just threaten countries, right, with sanctions or military action, and they expect to be obeyed.
Mhm.
And on top of that, Trump has another problem, right? He doesn't trust the State Department as part of the blob, the deep state at
Right.
all, right? Everyone within that institution is thoroughly indoctrinated, right, in, shall we say, a more traditional plan for U.S. hegemony and primacy, what we should call U.S. foreign policy orthodoxy. And Trump has his own plan, as we saw in his national security strategy, or at least the people close to him, like Elbridge Colby, for it's not giving up hegemony and U.S. primacy, but it is a retreat and retrenchment of it, and then an attempt at an idea of pushing the proxies forward in the Pacific, right?
Yes.
The Philippines, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and the Europeans against Russia over here, and the Israelis against Iran, and the U.S. consolidates its position, taking total control of the Western Hemisphere. That's his idea, and to an extent, that is, they call it burden sharing, they call it division of labor, but it's also probably pushing more onto the plates of the Europeans and
Yes.
also these proxies in the Pacific than they can actually handle. And the blob, the deep state, right? They don't agree with any of this. They don't agree with this idea of a stabilization of relations with Russia, so that the U.S. can then first concentrate on China or on Venezuela or on I don't know, Nigeria or whatever Trump has targeted this week. So he does not believe that he can work with anyone in the State Department, because they would actively seek to either just not fulfill or to sabotage anything they were thus tasked. Is his goal of somehow coming to terms with Russia and stabilizing the situation in the European area. So that's why he's gone to, and we see this again. Who's he going to for negotiations with Russia? Steve Witkoff, who is a real estate developer. I mean, he does speak Russian. I mean, that's good. But he's not a trained diplomat. He's not trained in international relations, right? I've heard him describe. Oh, he's charming. That's great. I mean, what that and I don't know, that and $7 will buy you a cup of coffee at Starbucks, right? Maybe I'm lowballing that number there, but anyway, I don't know how. I haven't bought a cup of Starbucks in the U.S. in 2 decades, so I might be a little behind the price there.
All right.
And Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who I don't even know what the hell Jared Kushner is supposed to be, but the other person they've attempted to drag in, although evidently Hegseth has tried to corral him since then, is the Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, who briefly appeared and was presented as a replacement for Keith Kellogg. His primary bona fides being he's a political loyalist to Vance and thus to Trump, right? Friends that they went to law school together and so forth. So that's their diplomatic team. It's a bunch of amateurs, right? Who the advantage of them is they're not ideologically indoctrinated and blinded like the usual blob, State Department people are. But it also means they're not capable of real professional level diplomacy. And Russia's coming to realize that, even if Trump and a small cadre of people within his administration do have a desire at some level to come to some type of terms, probably not Russian terms, but terms with Russia in Ukraine, and stabilize the situation and save as much of a proxy regime there as they can. Russians are coming to understand that the US is just diplomacy incapable at the level that they would require, that the absence of trust requires a real process. And Putin himself said about this, us demanding a real, full teams working diplomatic negotiation process. It's not that's the way that I want to do it. That's the only way it can be done between two great powers, right? That in such a situation, it's what has to be done. So I mean that is the problem with the State Department. With regards to Europe and NATO, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that the Kremlin started out this thinking they could launch the special military operation, force the Kiev regime and NATO to come to terms, right? Probably with the Donbass and some agreement not to extend Ukraine into NATO, and then there would be some kind of return to normal relations, right? Business as usual with Europe. Okay, if that was their plan, and I believe it was, they've been severely abused of that delusion since then. There will not be an end to this conflict that will see any restoration of peace, of stability, of business as usual with Europe. Okay, Europe has worked itself into a Russian hating frenzy. I mean, it's hard to find a historical parallel. I mean, even the Germans, if we want to talk World War II, I'm not so sure that it reached that level of shrillness. So I mean, Russia's just caricatured as the evil in every way, and they can't even. They refuse to even do diplomacy with Russia. They won't speak to him, not on the phone, not with, one low-level person to another, nothing. So, and they're very angry that the U.S. is breaking their code on Russia and doing that. And it's compounded by the fact that they have literally committed economic suicide in the pursuit of this geopolitical conflict with Russia, by the blowback from their own sanctions, which has hurt them far more than it has Russia. But they cannot accept losing to Russia in Ukraine. Cannot accept it. They will not accept it. As far as they're concerned, the events of 2014, the Westback Maidan Putsch, geopolitically flipped Ukraine, and they had it for almost a decade since then, more or less under their control. And they feel it's like a dog urinating on its territory, right? They refuse to give it up. They refuse to acknowledge the reality. And ultimately, because they're suffused with this supremacist messianic ideology of exceptionalism, Western exceptionalism, where they believe they truly believe that they are structurally, societally, and above all, morally superior, not just to Russia, but to every other country in the world. And therefore, anything they do in the foreign policy and security realm is justified, because they're the good guys. They wear the white hats, and the other side are the inferior bad guys. Right. And to admit losing to Russia in Ukraine would be a fundamental challenge to their worldview, to their very identity, for their belief in the way the world works and their place in it. So it's completely, and it's not just a handful of leaders. It's pretty much the entirety, or the vast majority of the European political and military ruling elite. So there's no hope even that in most cases, right? So we've got Hungary and Slovakia, and now a Ukraine skeptic prime minister in Czechia, right? But you really can't see this happen structurally in Germany, in France. Their politics are too managed to allow such a heretical position on foreign policy to come forward. And in countries like Romania, where it had a possibility of, we saw that they just annulled democracy in the country to, you can't vote for this guy. You're not allowed to, right? It's just banned because that position is unacceptable. So what we've heard repeatedly from from the vast majority of European political leaders, military leaders, intelligence leaders, there is a war with Russia coming, a direct war with Russia coming. Maybe it's in 2 years, maybe it's in 3 years, maybe it's in 5 years, maybe it's 2030, right? But it's coming. And the European people need to prepare for it. They need to pump money into their military industrial complex. We heard from both French and British generals in the past 2 weeks that the French and British people need to sacrifice their own sons and daughters to fight Russia, right? That's the mental space that they're in. And we've just, Google war with Russia, and you will get dozens and dozens of statements, right, by pretty much every leader, right, across. And they're trying to use it to continue aid to Ukraine, to pump more money away from social affairs, from welfare, societies into warfare societies in Europe. And they're trying to return the draft to large numbers of European countries, right? Because they can't get enough of their citizens willing to join their militaries, especially when they're talking about going to war with Russia. Right. So Russia is paying attention to all of this, right? They can't ignore it. And there was a far more important than the Q&A, in my mind, is Putin spoke extensively at a meeting of the Russian military collegium over a few days before the Q&A last week. And there was a lot said about the SMO, but also just about the general military and geopolitical position behind it. We heard from the Secretary of Defense, the Russian Minister of Defense, Belousov. We heard from the Russian Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov. We heard from Putin. Putin spoke twice, actually, there. And essentially they've resigned themselves to the fact that they're going to be at war with Europe, that yet Europe is going to go to war with them. And I believe that Europe is probably not going to directly attack Russia. And Russia certainly has no plans to attack Europe. What is going to happen is they're going to send troops into Ukraine, right? Or possibly Moldova. It could expand horizontally. The Ukraine conflict could expand horizontally out like that. But, into the gray area between the two countries, such as it still exists. And that, of course, would lead to direct war. And Russia has made that perfectly clear that is unacceptable. So that's the way it will almost certainly start. They want the Kiev regime to hang on for another 2 or 3 or however many years until several things happen. One, until they believe or they hope, and I have some sincere doubts about this, that they will have been able to resuscitate their military industrial complex. And when I say that, I should say their military industrial complexes, because they don't have one military industrial complex in Europe. They have 12 or 13 little scattered, fractured, individual pork-eating military industrial complexes that are just not capable of the task, right? Mostly because not only, but in part at least because they're not unified, right? They're not all buying the same weapon systems, right? It really limits what they're capable of at scale and interoperability amongst their military forces. The other thing, of course, that they're hoping for, and to mobilize their people, right, for war, conscription, draft, however you want to call it. So that's one part. The other thing is they expect Donald Trump to be gone. The next leader of the U.S., right, whom will be more traditional U.S. hegemonic master, right, whether that's Marco Rubio on the Republican side or pretty much any Democrat, right, they expect the Trump aberration to be gone. Of course, they're hoping that J.D. Vance doesn't succeed Trump. That would be very problematic to this whole thing. But they've got a few years, and whatever Trump may say, the U.S. economy is not looking really good, and there are social issues, and it's not at all inevitable that J.D. Vance will follow Trump, as the next president. That is not guaranteed in the slightest. So that is absolutely something they're not hoping on. But yes, this is not a bluff. Right? Whether they're capable of what they themselves believe they plan to do, right? That's another story. But I believe that they believe they're going to war against Russia in a few years. And Russia sees that, they hear that, and we heard at that collegium that Russia is going to do what they have to do to prepare for that eventuality and to win that conflict too.